Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It's actually our first user group in a series of user groups. This one is going to be focused on construction in progress, or CIP, and it's a best practices and roundtable discussion. And our host today, I'm so thrilled to introduce, is Angie Bolton. She is our Senior Product Manager for Sage Fixed Assets. And I'm going to hand it over to her quickly so she can get started and everybody can start getting educated. Angie, over to you.
Thanks, Tani. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to our first users group that we're kicking off today for Sage Fixed Assets. Each month we'll have a different, a different subject line that we'll go into and dive into. They'll be recorded, so they're also available and will be available for you that you attended afterwards as well. So today I'm going to go through just a short slideshow and talk about best practices. So a lot of these too, not only will they be roundtable discussions about real use cases, and please chime in, that's what we're here for. And then, but also I always want to kind of kick them off in best practices so they can be educational as well. So we know how to use the systems or just in general, knowledge and expertise in fixed asset lifecycle management altogether. So that being said, I'll go dive in. I got multi-monitors, so I got stuff all over the place for you today. Today, we're going to talk about some introductions, just a little bit about my background, an overview of what we'll be discussing, best practices, some implementation too for things to consider for implementation of CIP, and then also an open discussion, which means I'm not doing a demo of the product, but if you want to chime in with real questions and you're like, what would it look like if I did my project in the software, or things that I should be considering when I want to implement, or things that I'm already doing now and how can I make them better, please chime in. I say there's no such thing as a bad question, and most of the time I find in my 26 years of experience in fixed assets is that if you have a question, someone else that's on the phone is probably wondering the same thing. So we're just here to get comfy, get cozy, and have a great discussion.
And Angie, just to let everyone know, we are in a listen-only mode. You can choose to take that off some point if you like, but everybody can pop their questions into the question area on the dashboard.
Yep, but I have that open, and then after I get through with the slides, we can open it up for other discussion if we need to. Okay. Thank you, Tani. Okay. So an overview of CIP, if you are here and you're wondering what it is, hopefully most of you already kind of know, but it basically means that we're keeping track of all of these projects that have either expense or capitalized line items in it so that we can, still include it on our balance sheet, these projects. Most people already have a CIP GL account, and this is where all those transactions go to, just to make sure that we're all reconciling each month going forward. So these projects is what we usually talk about too in sales and marketing, is before your asset becomes a fixed asset, right? So we're tracking everything, every invoice, every contract agreement probably with your project too is always good, every debit, every credit, those sort of things, anything that has to do with this project. Knowing that some of these projects may only be a couple weeks, some could be a couple years or even longer, just knowing that this information needs to go somewhere. Where's it going now? How are we tracking it? How can we do better? Sometimes too, some of these projects, especially the ones that are very long, have lots of different pieces moving, lots of different budgets that are getting redefined, revised along the way, and lots of different people also being included in these projects, not just the fixed asset manager. So why are we talking about CIP today in a users forum, and why are we talking about how we should and could automate this process? There's many reasons. We're going to dive deep into each one of these, but just from a high level perspective, anytime we automate anything, we also reduce errors, right? We not only reduce the errors and the mistakes, but we also get to see where we're missing processes, and we can improve on those processes. We're also missing audits, better use of our time with auditing and compliance. We're also, boosting our accuracy, but but not just accuracy in the data too, but when you have accurate data, you also get that tracking and you get the precise information across all different things that drive better decisions, like even vendors, right? If we're keeping track of all this information in one central repository of all of our invoicing and stuff, for example, we can start to see trends on vendors. If we've been using the same vendor for flooring, let's say, for example, for many years, and all of a sudden we didn't have a visibility and real-time insights on what they've been charging us year over year, project over project, we can start to see that, and we might even be surprised by what we see, that, oh my gosh, maybe we should be looking at a different flooring person. They've really been increasing year over year, and they're not giving us anything different or better. So this is where we can also start seeing that information when we start automating these processes and these projects in a better, more defined way. Also, when we start automating stuff, then we also start to find that we have better communication internally because we're all looking at the same thing. Most of the time when I see CIP, I go in, so 26 years of life cycle management of fixed assets across all industries, all sizes. What I find all the time is these different disparate spreadsheets, right? So, and there's no standardization across these spreadsheets. There's no rhyme or reason. Most of them are adopted from turnover. And if someone has a new project, they say, well, let's just take a copy of this last project template, I like to say, in a spreadsheet and save as and just redo it. But what you're probably doing, and what happens a lot, is that when you do that, if a formula was already wrong in the first project, it's going to be wrong in that one, and the next, and the next, and the next, right? And what we're also missing is the reporting concept and aspect of that, because Excel isn't a report generator, right? So when we look to say, when someone says and comes to us like on a higher level, like a CFO, says, I really want to see what our spend to date is across all these projects. It's very, very difficult and very time consuming to do that if you're not in an automated system where everything's at. So these are things that we're going to kind of discuss today too. So best practices, when we talk about CIP, there's lots of things that are best practices. You'll hear this word all the time, obviously, in software, but when we're talking about CIP, it's a muck everywhere, I've noticed. And that's okay, but we can clean it up and we can make it much smoother going forward. Eliminate manual errors is definitely a huge thing that we're all part of, right? So the more that we, enter data in, touch data, copy paste all the time, I call manipulating spreadsheet data, and move it across different places, we're always open for human error. We're people, we're humans, we make mistakes, it's okay. But it's not okay when we start making mistakes and auditors come knocking, and then we get penalties and fines, and and things aren't right on our balance sheet, and then there's looking for accountability, and even though we make mistakes, sometimes that's not okay. So when we start talking about best practices, we're really always starting with the human aspect, right? So we want to automate these data entry things so that we minimize the human touch. So in today's world with AI, which is exciting for me, is that what AI is really doing is cutting back on manual workflows, right? So anytime we automate anything, we're always eliminating that manual workflow, which makes our life easier as well. So, and then what that does is it always ensures a consistent standard practice across the board. So in CIP, I've noticed that it's not just the fixed asset manager, right? It's lots of different people are part of this project. So you have facilities, you have maintenance, you have project managers, you have accounting, you have FP&A who controls the budget. You have the internal auditors too, making sure the systems are checked and processes are checked and streamlined. You have all these different pieces and moving pieces of a project. When you have a system in place, when you're sharing that data and you're sharing that knowledge across, then everyone's really using that software also as a communicative tool. Because when you have your own spreadsheet on your own C drive or your D drive or your own drive, and even if it's not on a one share or a file share, then that's even a bigger problem, isn't it? Because you're the only one who sees it, where the rest of the team doesn't. So it's really hard to keep that that project moving in a streamlined fashion, and also hitting those target dates of when those projects are supposed to have those milestones and completed on a timeline. And this is where we see a lot of bottleneck. We also reducing duplicate entry and incorrect allocations, meaning, what does that mean exactly? That means when we get these invoices in, we're not duplicating these entries across different spreadsheets, different points of time of ERP systems, different subledgers, and those sort of things. And what we're doing is we should be moving that data seamlessly across so that we're not doing that. Because when we do that, multiple data entry across different places, we lose. It's kind of like the telephone game, you know. I talk to somebody on the phone, and then they talk to someone on the phone, and each time they do that, it decreases the message and it decreases the accuracy of the conversation. It is no different in software, right, or manual processes, or those that are disconnected. We have the same problem. Okay, so ensuring compliance. Anytime that we have duplicate entry and we're putting things into manual human form, then all of a sudden we get out of compliance, right? So when we maintain things in a system that's centralized, standardized, and open communication, then all of a sudden our compliance becomes that much better. And what does that mean? That means that we have an audit trail for transactions. We have an audit workflow, typically in software solutions, where it's identified who did what and when and where. We also have the non-human touch. So when we get a SOX audit or an internal external audit of our processes, what they're really doing on a check, they have a standard checkbox, right? And what they're really doing is making sure where is the automation and where is there not automation, right? And so where there isn't automation, then those auditors go deeper and deeper to find that information to see where the mistakes lie, right? So anytime we could take that checkbox off the list for auditing and compliance, then we're just being, much more, we're happier. We're getting less questions and less opportunity for penalties, fees, and other hourly fees that we don't need or want, right? So that's how we're ensuring compliance with our best practices. But we're also, another thing that we touch base on specifically in CIP is setting up approval workflows. And what these do is they enforce our policy adherence, our procedures, and we're making sure that the project is going as it's supposed to, on time, on budget. When we don't have these approval workflows going, then that's when we start seeing budget creep, right? That's when we start seeing that our projects aren't getting done on time. And in manufacturing in particular as well, as across other industries, when those projects aren't on time, that affects so much more that maybe we don't see in the accounting chair, right? And so it really creates so many bottlenecks and then compliance issues, because maybe sometimes too that project has permits that has compliance on its own, or it has environmental compliance that it's waiting for to get to the next step of the next level. So when we think about compliance in CIP, we're not just talking about the compliance and making sure that we're entering the data correctly. We're also talking about making sure we're hitting these milestones for every aspect of that project along the entire life cycle, right? And then when you have an automated solution, whatever that looks like to you, then that's when you can start getting those real-time compliant reports, like where are we? Where is our spend right away? Who generated this? Who entered this information? And so forth. So these are some real best practices that get lost along the way, especially when we're just kind of, I like to say, running amok in spreadsheet land, right? So other best practices in improving our efficiency. So when we start talking about and thinking about these other items that we've already previously discussed, we're also talking about how we can improve our efficiency with these, right? Anytime we move something from a manual workflow process to an automated workflow, then all of a sudden we're improving that efficiency tenfold most of the time, which means that we're using automation to work with us, not against us, right? So we can move assets that are done in place in service, when they're placed in service, directly over into the subledger without having to track anything down, making sure we have every invoice, reconciling 5 ways to Sunday just to make sure that we can actually place this asset in service. when we talk about CIP and the processes and procedures we wrap around a project, right? When we're talking about the communication aspect and keeping track of everyone who's part of this project, we're also talking about making sure that we're improving that efficiency for every piece of the puzzle for that project, right? So that we can move seamlessly without delays of placing assets in service. I've seen lots of times where there's a bottleneck of approvals, notifications, seeking the cost, making sure they're all done. And the bottleneck is this. It's people not knowing, all the people of that project knowing that that asset is placed in service and that it needs to move to the subledger. So when I've done audits myself on CIP data against and reconciled against subledgers, I've noticed every single time that there's always assets left on CIP that should have actually been placed in service many moons ago. And when we don't do that effectively or efficiently, then a lot of times we're actually missing out on depreciation from a federal tax perspective, not just from a GAAP perspective. So boosting accuracy, when we put all these things into a container, we can boost that accuracy and track that spend and budget in real time. So instead of when someone comes and says, I need to see this information right now, you can actually provide that in a much more efficient timeline than, let's say, a week to 2 weeks. And then by then it's already moved and you're not getting real-time data, right? Also, what's nice is that we can put standardization around automation, right? So we can say, if it's machinery and equipment, here's this template that I can create an asset with all the GL information, the proper class codes, all this stuff is already predefined, right? So that you can just send the spend over and just let it sit there in the subledger. So now we're not playing in the subledger anymore. And the only thing we're doing in the subledger at that point is pressing depreciation, running reports. So this is where these best practices of the flow of automation and the flow of the accuracy of the data comes together, is that it really eliminates time in one place. And then you're really just living in CIP most of the time, right? So we would when we talk about all of this, the last one is drive better decisions. So in any software, even in an ERP situation, when you're running your data and you have a standard process and everyone's using it, they all have their piece of the puzzle and they're doing their part, you can always make better decisions, right? Analytics tools are everywhere. There's no difference in fixed asset lifecycle management. Anytime you have different systems that have standardization, people are sharing that knowledge across the board, then you have way better data, right? Good data in is good data out, and we can see financial impacts of that. We can see the trends in our invoices and our vendors. We can see trends in the assets that we're making, which also assists us at the CIP level in even budgeting and forecasting forward about what other projects that are similar in nature that are coming on board are gonna cost us at the end of the day. And sometimes when we're running spreadsheets all over the place across turnover, we just don't have that visibility. And that's why automating is a really good best practice as well. So we're like, Angie, great. These are all really fantastic best practices. I know. And then was like, but when it comes to implementing our own, what are the things we should consider? Or even if we've implemented it, but we feel like we're not getting the best value over this, automation, what are things maybe that I missed, maybe some steps I missed along the way? And those are all great questions. Those are questions I often get, actually. So I'm not just shooting from the moon on those ones. But these in order is the way that I have implemented that finds very good success on implementing projects into an automated solution, right? So what we talk about is how, first of all, we need to review our open projects. So we have projects coming over from CapEx, right? We got all the approval, we got it all down, we know what we're doing, we know what vendors we chose, we have our contractor, project manager, all those things, right? Great. Now, before we even get started with our budget that we now have, we need to review how that is going to go. How are we going to categorize this project, these assets? How are we going to split them out into componentized assets too? So many times over, I see CapEx projects are approved, ready to go, and then they shove all building improvements and building into one line item. And that is not what we do in fixed assets for so many reasons. That's a different topic for a different month. But so we want to know right away, how are we going to categorize these assets so that we know when they're done and ready to be placed in service and moved to the subledger and in the correct way, correct class codes, correct property types, so we're benefiting the most out of these assets when we break them out throughout the life of this project. How are we going to standardize this? What are the fields that we need to keep track of that will help us analyze our data, report on our data, and ensure that we're doing right by our data and our project, right? What are some of the things that people are asking us for that we should incorporate in our standardization and customization needs that will help us in the future? So you kind of have to think about, you know, what does the ultimate goal, end goal look like, and work backwards from that before we even talk about, you know, putting the data in the system, right? So these are things that you want to consider and lay out in front of you before you even hit the ground running. And then, of course, who's involved? So a lot of times in fixed asset projects, people are like, oh, it's just accounting. That is totally false. It's not just accounting, and it's not just finance. Sometimes too, and most of the time, you want someone from tax team involved so you can break those assets out properly to get the best bang for our buck, meaning how can we break these out to make sure that we're getting the expense we need at the end of the day, right? We also want to get FP&A involved, financial planning and analysis, because we want to see what is important to them to analyze the data and for future budget, for future CapEx approvals. Once we get them involved too, then we get to see through their eyes, through their perspective of what's important, which is always helpful. So we don't live and grow and work in a silo, right? So we want to know their perspective because it helps everybody out. And then of course, facilities, project manager, maintenance even, what do they need to know? The facilities and maintenance are always there. They're the one touching the assets once they're in service. They're the ones that know when they should be replaced, how much use they're getting and what that looks like, what hazardous conditions are they around that maybe decreases their life or need more repair. So these are all important players of the game, okay? And many times they're not included, okay? So the data workflows, you know, how is this done currently? So when we talk about implementing a new process, we really have to look ourselves in the mirror and reflect back about how are we doing this now? What's not working? How can we improve this? Now is the time to improve it. If we're sitting here with the team and we're discussing all these pitfalls and the things that we wish it had. Now is the time to, I love whiteboard sessions. I have whiteboards over my house on wheels. I roll them around constantly. And they're really great to see from a different point of view, right? And a bird's eye view and in a visual sense about where are my pitfalls. And then when I put it all out, I can circle where these empty holes are and how can I improve that with automation, a different person on the team, you know, those sort of things are all good things to consider and implement and bring into your process. Where is this data coming from? And look at those workflows of where this data is coming from. Is it automated? Is it one person? Is it centralized? Is it scattered across many different disparate systems, different departments, locations, people? And how can we bring that together in a cohesive fashion to put it into one container to then move it forward in a better way, right? And what is the condition of our data? Dirty data out is dirty data in, is dirty data out, right? So when we think about implementing anything, we should really look at the data of the we should really look at where our data is today. What does that look like today? Is it clean? Is it messy? Does it have descriptions? Does it have invoice numbers? Is there consistency and standardization across how we explain things and enter it in? Who's entering APPO information in before I get it? If I'm the fixed asset person or the CIP manager, what is that condition of my data and how can I improve that going forward and then incorporate that into my implementation plan, right? Once you get all of that going and solidified and like, yep, this is what I want it to look like, this is my holy vision, then you can start talking about the system design aspect, because what's driving your design of your system is your data and your processes, not the other way around, right? Sometimes it's the other way around, but when we really start to think of why we need a system, it's because we're looking at the information we just discussed before we even think about bringing in a system, right? It's always how it starts. So then we start thinking of the system. So thinking about all the things we just discussed about reviewing your open projects, your data, your processes, then we think, well, how are we going to incorporate this into the system? And how can then the system also improve on things we didn't think of beforehand, right? So these are important things. These are the things the system can do for our important things. And then this is also what the system can do to fill in these blanks of these missing holes. Customization, our workflow, who has access to what does their access look like? What is their daily role? What are they responsible for? And so forth, right? And that also drives the process and procedures. So that's why I put these in order all the time and how I approach these projects, because they all play with one another. It's kind of like, the frog game. You skip over and then you come back and then right? And you keep seeing where each one of these in this flow helps the other grow, right? So then our process and procedures, we talk about, our data is coming over and now we have this diagram of the data is flowing from APPO and it integrates and imports into our CIP, and we do all of our invoicing there and all of our PO there and all of our credits that we get back, and everything lives there. So in fixed asset management, if you have CIP, all the invoicing, all the purchase orders, all the approvals, the contracts, the permits, all that stuff should be housed in CIP, whereas the subledger is literally just saying, here's my assets, this is where they're located, this is how I describe them, and here's their depreciation across multiple books, right? And that's really what the subledger should be holding, where CIP holds all the other stuff in between, right? And then, of course, when you have that all together, now you can get reporting. Now you can easily produce something that says, here's my trending. Here is my spend to date on these projects. Here's my consolidated report of how all of my projects look today and where they are against the budget. So that's where we start seeing the fruits of all this labor that's leading up to that, right? And so all that's encompassing is really about our best practices of CIP and how CIP should really flow together in this nice little fashion, right? And how are we doing this with our data today? And how can we and where can we improve to get to where we want to be? So that's my soapbox. Now I'd like to open it up for discussion and an open forum where, if you have real world questions that you want answered, if it's how you want them, like if you have CIP or Sage Fixed Asset Planning, how are you using it today that you'd like to use it, or are you finding something that you're struggling with that we can put it into show you how it works in the product, those sort of things. So go to the Q&A, trying to figure out how to open it for chats. So there's one question: is CIP compatible with other ERP systems? So there we have an integration link that actually works. So there's two ways. With the Sage CIP, you can do the common import-export functionality where you can import spreadsheets across one project, multiple projects at a time, and put that data in from AP or PO into the CIP. However, if you want something that's a little more seamless, there is an integration link that we have that's extra, but it also, can pull everything from the background and put it in. So there's a couple different options, but regardless, we know that you don't want to enter in all of your data by hand, because that eliminates, right? That gets us back to the best practice of manual entry. So we can bring that information in. You can dump it into pending transactions that comes with every project. That's usually what people do. That's kind of how I implement it across people's instances, is that we bring all the information into pending line items, and then, you know, people that have the capacity and ability to get into CIP will then start moving those transactions around to line items or wherever they need to go. That's the fastest way to do it, because then you can also start reporting on your pending too and your actual and pending line items. So at least gets the data in really fast. That's one way to do it. Any other questions? Don't be shy, everybody. Let me see. How can I also? Should we here? Can we see what it looks like? Yeah, sure. Thank you. Of course. Yeah. Let me share my screen. So this is what the CIP looks like. It's a new interface. I'm not going to go in full-blown demo mode today. We have a demo that's pending, coming in April sometime. But this is what it looks like. This is the new interface that looks a lot like the depreciation now, which is awesome. Some things that we've really improved upon is now when you go into the system, you can see the project in the project list view, you can see all the projects. So now we can see all the projects we have, which is cool because at the bottom, you can see all of the costs and stuff associated with these projects in one consolidated area before running a report or even going into the project themselves. So this is pretty awesome. When I go into it, I can see all the different information about my projects. I can move columns around. I can customize it. I can drop this out, and that was a sort subtotal. I can also put sums at the bottom of these areas and give it an average, an account, or a sum right here. And then I can actually select all this and even export to Excel or run some of these standard reports that we see here. So there's lots of usability functionality in here. When we talk about a project and the project line item, think of a line item as an asset, right? So a line item is going to be an asset. Not all line items, because there are expensed line items too, right? So you can keep expensed, which is great. So even let's say that this project is fully completed down the road, you can still go back and review this project for its entirety, right? You can still view all the expensed line items and the assets that were sent over. So you see these status that says sent. That means that these assets were sent to the subledger. The spend was complete, they're placed in service, and now they're sent over. You can map this information if you're using the depreciation piece. You can go to customizing fields, which is part of the implementation we talked about, right? How we want to customize our system. And within here, we can also say, I want to track for reconciliation purposes, which is great for accounting users, right? We want to reconcile all these assets that were placed in service back to this project. You don't get that with spreadsheets and other common systems. What is cool is you can choose a destination field in the depreciation piece. I usually reserve custom field 10 for that personally. And so that what happens is when I send this asset over, I guess there's a different one in here. Planning reference is user 10. When I send this asset over into the subledger, then it actually puts this identifier of what project it came from, what line item it was in the project, so that in the depreciation piece, I can then group all the assets together in custom field 10, which I would name in depreciation CIP number or reference. And then I can group them all together and do a print, and I can reconcile easily, which is a common, very common audit question on their checklist, is how do you know all these assets from CIP came over to your subledger in a timely fashion? If you have the two systems, you could go into depreciation, group those assets together by that reference number, provide that as a report, and then also provide the report out of that particular project, and then present that to them, and they say, oh, no more questions, So are you able to add physical invoices that are being paid for the project? So once the project is complete, you can see physically all invoices. Currently, we can't do attachments in CIP only, but we are currently working on that in product development to have that in the next release, so that you can also have images and a history tab in the CIP like you have in depreciation. So that is coming, because that is one of the #1 things we get asked. We personally have been asking for it, and so we're putting that in priority status and getting it out in the next release. I may have missed this, but is there a way to allocate soft costs to assets? Like if one company does engineering that will become a leasehold improvement, can you sum all the soft costs and allocate them to different assets? Yeah, that are all under one project. You can. So what I've seen and have implemented with other customers in the past, specifically the retail, right? Because retail has lots of leaseholds improvements, lots of different locations. What we've been able to do is we created a project that just said leasehold improvements, right? So they utilized that to just put in every leasehold improvement. So they would create a line item that says what that leasehold is, and then use all the different fields. So you have all these different fields that you can track information on. These are all user fields, by the way. So these are just usually out of the box, they say user 1, 2 through 20, right? So they track all of that cost in the transactions for that particular leasehold, and then it allocates it up, and you can move things around, and then it'll all roll up to the spend of that leasehold. When you send it over to Subledger, it'll roll it all up for you. You can use asset templates, and at that point, you can still split it out too if you wanted to. So you can still split it out into different assets, or just keep it and send it all at once. But then you can also go back to CIP to see all those transactions that occur for that leasehold without having to have a new project for every leasehold. You can literally just that. Another way it's been done is if people can, another way to do it is where people have what they call restaurants usually have like bumps in the night, right? So they'll have a bumps in the night project itself. So if I go to project list, they'll have a bumps in the night project themselves that they just keep open. And then they'll just keep adding these bumps in the night as a project to have all the costs, soft costs roll up. And then when it's done, then they'll push it over to fixed assets. How would that be done? Can I demonstrate? Well, I mean, I can demonstrate, sure, but it's basically, I'm not going to import any, I don't have the import thing going right now, but if let's say this was a project, okay, let's see, project. A new project, I could call them leaseholds, project code. I'll just 19, 2025 leasehold. Start date, it's fine. Budget, so let's say through CapEx for the year, I have a budget for leaseholds of $15,000 for all leaseholds through 2025. So then I set up this project. I can put additional information in here. So we'll just start from 1 to go. So it'll have all this information. I don't have anything yet because I just created it. It's a shell. I want to include pending transactions in my actuals because that's how I'm going to bring everything over. I could put extra stuff in here. This is also easier to find. And now I'm going to go into the line items. And so you'll see that when I first create my project, there's a pending. So when you import assets, this is where I'm going back earlier, where you say, I have all my APPO stuff and I want to get it into FAS. just out of the box, you could do the custom import, takes you through a wizard to just pull all your information in. I always set it up with my users to identify a line item as 9999. So it all just gets into the project by project name, or excuse me, project code, and it goes in and dumps it there. And then I can move those pending things after I create line items. So I want to create a new line item, and I can say leasehold for location A, let's say, right? So then I can even put a budget. So out of this 15,000, maybe for this particular location for leasehold, I've allocated, 5,000. With my keyboard here. Oh, sorry. I'm on a server and it's not recognizing my keyboard all the way. Anyway, you would have, and then you could import all your transactions. So you can either import transactions once your line item is set up, or you could add new transactions. Sorry, my internet's getting funky. Can you guys hear me? Am I on a lag? Okay. You set them up, and then you can keep adding transactions, and then they roll up to the line item. Let's save line item. Something's funky on my, sorry, something's weird on my screen. And then you could have a bunch of different line items that just keep going for different leaseholds and add all the transactions. And I'm sorry, my something's going on with my connection. Isn't that just the case, right? Another question is it possible to spread one invoice, say architect fees, across multiple line items? Yes, you can split transactions. So if I had some transactions in here, let me go back to a different project. This project. Oops. Oh, that was completed. So let's go to the next. And if I had transactions here, I could go in here and oops. Oh. Oh, something's happening on my system. I don't know. Using a different version or something. Yeah. Oh, it's active. Transaction. Something's with my system and it's not allowing me to do a lot of stuff today. Anyway, you can split these. I don't know what my system is doing, but oh, there we go. So I can split this transaction and I can split it in how many parts I want to. And then I can also, once I've split it too, I can also move it. So you can move or copy the transaction. So to the question, can I share it? Yes. So that would be a copy instead of a move. So I could say what line item, and here it'll tell me what line items that I have in my project that I might want to copy to. So this means that I'm making a copy to it. I'm not removing it from here because it belongs in both places, right? Where you can see why I'm already here, you can also see too, I can move it to different project too. So if this actually belongs in leaseholds and I accidentally imported it into the wrong one, I can also move it to that project as well, copy it there, or then just move it if I deselect copy. Once the project is completed and it moves to the subledger, does the system make a journal entry for you to book, or is that something done automatically once the project is completed? That's a good question. So when you when it's moved to the subledger, it's moved out of CIP, right? So we don't have anything that says it moved from CIP. It'll show up in your subledger general posting, right? So when you move it to the subledger and you run depreciation, and then when you run the GL posting report and you feed that back, so there's integrations there for different ERPs, especially in the Sage software family. When you send that GL posting back to your GL, then it'll pick that up and you'll see it there. Oh, the scheduled for 30 minutes. Sorry. I thought it was for an hour. But anyway, if you have any other questions or your questions didn't get answered, please let me know. And you can email me directly at angela.bolton@sage.com, and I can answer them for you. Or if you want to dive in a little deeper with me, just let me know and I can set that up as well. Thank you for your time today. I didn't realize it was just a half hour, but I could talk about this all day, obviously. So yeah, if you have any other questions or feedback or something that I just didn't touch base on, just give me a shout out and let me know. Okay.